Hello there and welcome to the Secrets of Organ Playing podcast. I'm your host, Vidas Pinkevičius. Today's guest is James D. Hicks, an American organist who lives and works out of Bernardsville, New Jersey, and holds degrees in music from the Peabody Institute of Music, Yale University, and the University of Cincinnati. His other studies include instruction at the Royal School of Church Music in England, and he is an associate of the American Guild of Organists. James held liturgical positions throughout the eastern United States and in 2011 retired after 26 years of service at the Presbyterian Church in Morristown, New Jersey. James has a tremendous reputation in the organ world from his ongoing Nordic Journey project. And as it has evolved, the mission of Nordic Journey has become threefold: the creation of new music, 15 new works thus far, the rediscovery of forgotten and or unpublished works from the early 20th century, and finally the inclusion of some of the mainstream masterworks of the Nordic composers from countries like Sweden, Norway, Finland, Denmark, Iceland, and other places in the Nordic region. Further step James is now taking is discussing with a Swedish publisher the creation of a Nordic Journey series in which the works that have been written for him and have no publisher could see publication and be made available to other musicians. So in this conversation, James shares his passion about his Nordic Journey project, and I hope you feel inspired to find out more about those rarely explored gems of the organ repertoire. Let's go to the show. So James, thank you so much for joining in this conversation. I met you online, I followed your work, I've seen your amazing project called Nordic Journey. We'll talk in depth about it, and I'm even more eager to meet you in person in about less than 1 month, right? When you will be coming to Vilnius physically to play some of the best highlights of this fantastic project. Thank you so much for joining in this interview. Thank you so much for your upcoming words of wisdom, and welcome to the show.
Well, thank you for having me. I don't know how much wisdom I have, but I have a lot of passion and enthusiasm for this music, and I'm just so delighted to be here and to share some of my thoughts on this.
So imagine Nordic Journey. I was in a few times in Sweden only, from these Nordic countries, but I right away felt something very, very peculiar about this place that nowhere else probably on earth is, right? And you wrote also something about that too in your student days. So do you remember what inspired you to take on more interest into this Scandinavian and Nordic Journey project?
Right. Well, it's kind of a long story, but yes, it did start a long time ago, kind of by accident. You know, when we're all students, we're trying to learn all kinds of different musical styles and to immerse ourselves into different things. And I always was very interested in the music of Sibelius, particularly, but also Carl Nielsen, the symphonies and the chamber music, and Grieg's setting of Norwegian folk songs. This was so different than the kind of standard repertoire and standard education that I was getting. And so I kind of on my own enjoyed this music very much, but somehow it went beyond just enjoying the music and then eventually playing the music. I felt there was a certain zeitgeist to a lot of this repertoire that could not be found, at least for me, in other types of music. I think there's this sense of nature, of darkness and light. There's a big folk song element, and it's a whole package which is considerably different than anything I'd ever heard before. And so I listened to a lot of this music, the standard kinds of symphonic works, chamber works, choral works, and then started to ask myself the question. I'm an organist. is there anything there for me? And I would ask professors about this and other people who are experts in the field of organ music. And really hardly anyone in the States could tell me anything. Mm-hmm. And finally, by accident, and this is way back now in the 70s, I found a recording in a used record store. We used to have those things back then, before the internet. Right. And I found this album by a Danish organist, and it had the Commotio of Carl Nielsen on it. And I thought, I've heard some of this guy's music. I will buy this and see what this piece is all about. It's an immense 20, 25-minute single movement work, and I listened to it, and I thought, I've got to play this. And then after playing that and other more standard works, like, say, the Sonata in G minor of Lindbergh, of Oscar Lindbergh, this opened up a whole different world to me. Mm-hmm. And so I never forgot that. So I was 20, 21, 22 at that time, and then went on in my career of church music, but I never forgot this. And so I would say about 10 years ago, I started thinking about the Commotio and the Lindbergh Sonata, and I thought, I love this music so much, and I love the music and other media that have been written by Scandinavian composers. There's got to be organ music. And again, I had the same experience 30 years down the line of not being able to easily find anything about Nordic organ music. And so at that point, I took it kind of as a challenge and spent several years just researching on internet, trying to learn about contemporary composers, going through scholarly articles, et cetera, and I got hooked. Mm-hmm. And the more I learned about it, the more I wanted to play it. And the more I played it, the more I wanted to add something new to the repertoire. And that was giving me the idea of finding contemporary composers who I respected to write music for me. Once I got to that point, I thought, I've got to start recording. And I didn't want to do it here in the States. I wanted to be as authentic as I could possibly be and save up the funds to do a recording somewhere over in Nordic lands. Mm-hmm. And this is this point about 2009, 2010. And at that point was when I learned about the music of Swedish composer Fredrik Sixten and other composers as well. And that's inspired me to make a recording. And I was able to talk a record producer here in the United States, Fred Homan of Pro Organo Records, to make the long trip over in the middle of winter in blizzards and whatnot to record the first album. And indeed, the cover of the first Nordic Journey CD was taken at night, and there's a moon in the background at Linköping Cathedral, and you see the snow. And to me, it's a perfect entree into the darkness, if you will, and the eloquence of Nordic expression.
James, when you told us the story, I kind of reminded me of those also my student years. I also, felt in search of some peculiar organ repertoire. Everyone was playing Bach, everyone was playing Franck, right, and Widor and Wern, and many other masters. But beyond that, you had to search, you had to go deeper, right? And in those early days, it wasn't very easy to find because internet was not available then. Right. So what you did then. Probably started just as a passion, right? Just a side project, right? In search of another field of repertoire, right? But then it developed into a lifelong pursuit, probably for you.
Exactly. Right now, you just summed it up perfectly. Mm-hmm. And as a kind of side thought to this whole project, as I get older, get sick of hearing the same things over and over and over. I think that's a problem within at least classical music. It might be a problem in other kinds of music as well. People want to play the same thing. People want to hear the same thing. And there's a whole world out there in all kinds of music. And even in organ music, which is kind of a niche endeavor, I guess, is a huge repertoire. And there's fantastic music all over the world from all periods of time. And this was also kind of a frustration with me. As great as Bach is, as great as Franck is, we will always have this and treasure this. There's a whole nother world out there. And I would like to take the same idea and do an Italian journey or South American. There's great musicians everywhere. So I'm trying to at least open my eyes and hope open other people's eyes to the fact that there's talent everywhere.
Mm-hmm. Exactly, and it deserves to be heard, right? Deserve to be
exactly
to have the proper place in a global organ repertoire.
Yes,
because those creative accidents do happen. Artists meet one another, like you met Fredrik Sixten, right? And
right.
By the way, I also got introduced to this composer from Sweden from your work. I was following your sharings on Facebook, and when you posted something that was liked or shared by or commented by Fredrik, I sort of felt curious. Who is Fredrik Sixten, right?
Yes.
And I've got hooked also, and I invited him on this podcast, which will happen very soon too.
Right.
So he was, of course, very kind to me to agree, and
yes,
and very very generous. So through these friendships, maybe accidental, basically. Meetings, right? Lifelong friendships might develop, like
exactly. And in fact, that's one of the beautiful things about this experience, which I never would have imagined, that I've made so many wonderful friends that they'll be my very close friends for the rest of my life in various Nordic countries, not just Sweden, but Norway and Denmark and Finland. And it's been a wonderful thing. And that's the nice thing about technology. I remember when I was young, you had to write letters to people.
Exactly.
But now you can talk and communicate with anyone. And that's the plus side, that kind of brings us together, and we learn from each other, I think, much quicker and much more easily.
The negative effect of this is because, of course, everybody doing this, and it becomes like the spammy messages. Like you never
yes.
expected somebody to communicate with you. So we do have to be quite sensitive how we approach strangers, exactly. Right? We have to.
Exactly.
Earn their trust, probably, instead of asking for them, give me something, an opportunity to play your organ, or invite me to your festival or something. We first have to be helpful to
exactly.
to them, to their purposes.
We have to get to know each other first, and why we're doing this in the first place, and what is our motivation. And so much is what is on the internet I just ignore and try to focus upon how is this going to advance our art that we love so much.
Exactly. So we got a little bit sidetracked now from
yes.
your Nordic journey, of course, but it's
yes.
all very related, and it brings me to your earliest memories. Can you share with us basically some of the earliest stories about the organ? Who introduced you to the organ, and how did you become passionate about it?
Yes, mine is a very common story. We all start piano lessons when we're very young. And I did that from age 6 or 7, and I was studying with the organist at my church.
Mm-hmm.
And so I never really gave much thought to the organ per se. I sang in boys' choirs right. and was involved in various aspects of liturgical music making. But I remember one lesson, I was playing this little piece, and I don't even remember what it was called, but it was kind of imitating the bells of a church tower, a carillon. Mm-hmm. And my teacher said to me, well, would you like to play this on the organ? Because we have chimes and different kinds of percussion stops. And I said, sure, let's play it on the organ. And I was hooked immediately. And so the deal was with this first teacher that I could study organ as long as I continued piano, because he was very much of the opinion that piano was kind of a foundation for keyboard technique.
Right.
So that's how it started in getting me on the organ. And within a couple of years, I was working a job at a church and playing every Sunday and working with choirs. And that's how it started.
So thanks for this boy choir, and of course thanks for this yes. local organist, right?
Right.
Somebody wise introduced you to this instrument. You
right.
you were curious about it, right? And you got hooked for life.
Exactly.
And just yesterday, by the way, I met some people in our organ studio at Vilnius University. It's called Undamaris, yes. And we had our first meeting for the sixth season.
Yes.
It started 6 years ago, and we just started, and new members, freshmen, and faculty members from other departments came who were just curious about the organ and wanted to try out. And I was just thinking about how many of them will stay, and how many of them will remember this particular day in 20 years later, maybe as a turning point in their life. So who told you about this local organist who got hooked you? It's all very, very amazing that these creative accidents do happen.
Yes.
And here we are.
Yes,
today.
I mean, if I had not known this person, I wouldn't be talking with you today about organ music.
Exactly.
And so we all need a mentor, and we all need someone to plant the seed. That's why it's that connection is so vital.
James, did you have any other interest besides music at that time?
Oh, yeah. I was involved in many things. I was involved in camping and Boy Scouts, and I was a golfer, and I was interested in the dinosaurs, and I used to go out west to dig in the western part of the United States, digging up fossils, and I was interested in many, many things, and I think that's a positive thing, because I never was someone who specialized, even in music, although I guess that's what I'm doing now. But a lifetime of trying different things and having different interests, I think, makes your music better.
Mm-hmm. Of course. And of course, when you say you had many interests, those interests might have led you to another career path.
Absolutely.
Right? Dinosaurs, archaeology,
yes.
Right? And even camping, you could be a scout guide or something, right?
Exactly.
If something happened early in your life, right? But then, again, something happened with organs, right? And
that's right. And I'm a better person for it, because it's such a challenge and such a wonderfully diverse art all in itself, and can do so many different things, and there's so many different kinds of organs and organ music. In an age where people have standardized instruments, the organ is really the only instrument that is different everywhere you go. Mm-hmm. And you could play the same make organ at two different places, and the acoustical properties and the specifications of the instruments will make for entirely two different experiences. And that's, to me, the joy of it. I'm not one of these people who believes in getting electronic organs and touring with them just so you have all the sounds pre-programmed. It's the joy of exploration with each organ that, to me, it's the great joy.
I hate to say this, James, and some people will be offended by what I will be saying right now, but to have an electronic organ, with one specification or maybe several specifications,
yes.
in one set, right? One sample maybe, and you go touring across the world, right?
Yes.
Which many people do. It's like a little bit like going to another continent, another country, and eating at McDonald's everywhere.
Yes, exactly.
McDonald's,
exactly.
To have your taste a little bit what you remember back home. It's also very predictable. It's safe, right? You have no risk to get infected from
yes.
some hedgehog meat,
yes.
somewhere in let's say Siberia. But
yes.
You do lose some pretty amazing experiences, right? Pretty unforgettable experience sometimes, which lead to something new, right? So,
and that's why I go to the organ. For example, in the Nordic organs, for example, when I made my first CD on the Setterquist organ, which was built in the 1920s at Linköping Cathedral in Sweden, it has its own unique tonal properties, and the way the different stops are voiced and the timbre, it's nothing like it, either in Germany or France or the United States or anywhere else. And that's intrinsically a part of the Nordic Journey, is not only to investigate the music, but to celebrate these unique sounds in different Nordic countries, using organs for which this music was intended.
And James, when you go, for example, to Italy, right, or to
Yes.
the Netherlands to play this Nordic Journey project pieces, right, do you find that you gain something from the local culture too? Although you are playing Nordic music, the instruments are not. And how do you find this collaboration between you, the locality, and the Nordic music?
Right. I find it a very enriching and creative experience. I look at music as much more fluid. While I try to, in my recordings, try for a certain degree of authenticity, I don't really think that there's one answer for a particular piece of music. I could take a CD that I recorded a few years ago and then play it somewhere else, and it would be entirely different, probably. So when I go to other societies or other styles of organ, the music really gains new layers of interpretation, and I feel like I understand this music in an entirely different way. For example, I had a piece recently written for me by Sven Ingvart Mikkelsen, who's at the Frederiksborg Castle in Hillerød, Denmark, and I played a piece of his in July on the 1610 Compendius organ, one of the oldest organs anywhere.
Wow.
And it was a variations and fugue on a Danish folk tune, and I premiered the piece there. But since then, I've played it at other places and have enjoyed it just as much because you get different sounds, different temperaments. The Compendius organ is in mean tone temperament, and I've played it on equal temperament and Werkmeister, and so it's not just even the stops, it's just the temperaments and the acoustical properties, which makes it so fulfilling to me. You could take that one piece and record it 20 times, and you'd have 20 different insights into this composer and to this wonderful music.
When you told this experience, James, I remembered how I first listened to the Volumina by Georgi Ligeti.
Yes.
That my friend and great mentor Hans Davidsson played in Örgryte Nya Kyrka in Örgryte New Church in Gothenburg during one of the inaugural recitals of that great North German style organ that they have, in 2000, in the year of 2000, and I was sort of transfixed by the idea of somebody really taking a leap here, right?
Yes.
Playing an avant-garde piece like this on a mean tone temperament organ. Like
exactly.
This. And he had two assistants pulling the stops and managing everything and doing miracles with registration, which could not be possible on, let's say, electro-pneumatical action organ at all.
Exactly.
And with motors and blowers turning off, those effects. Amazing experiences, and he was very, very brave. Hans was, I think, to do this. But of course, it all worked out so well. Just like on your case when you played in Frederiksborg Castle on 1610, right? This organ has only wooden pipes, as I remember, right?
Exactly.
So imagine playing your Nordic Journey pieces on this kind of instrument. This is very brave, James, what you did.
Well, it's a part of the beauty of the instrument we play. For example, Volumina, played on an organ like that, it has an organic kind of woody living experience, and contrast that with the same composer's soundtrack to the movie 2001: A Space Odyssey, which has had an electronic, metallic, almost artificial, aggressive kind of feel. And then that, just with that one composer, and then looking at organ music, you can achieve with the same composer a variety of musical experiences, taking the organ at the 1610 Compendius at the castle there in Denmark and playing the same piece on modern organs or other types of instruments. That's why I would never imagine wanting to play a virtual organ or electronic organ when you have so much variety within acoustical pipe organs.
True. organs are unique in that, as you say, no instrument has this flexibility, right? Pianos are always pianos today,
exactly.
Unless you do have some luck on playing Silbermann for the pianos, right?
Yes.
Then it's a little bit shady and exciting,
yes.
or even more early Steinways, right? Or other lesser played today instruments, although they kind of also get recognition today during this early performance practice.
Yes.
Basically resurgence of this movement, right?
You can hear this. You can hear this in other instruments. For example, the Vienna Philharmonic, I think they still use instruments from the 19th and 20th centuries. So you have the kind of more of a warm, kind of burnished sound, as opposed to maybe, just off the top of my head, like the Brianza, like the Chicago Symphony, which is very brassy and an entirely different sound. But I still think with organs, we have much more variety and centuries of different technologies, if you will, that is intrinsically related to the music that we play.
Mm-hmm. So this Nordic Journey project, right? You got hooked. You sort of you told me you are a hiker, right? By passion. You like hiking, especially in cold weather, right?
Yes, and I love it.
It happens sometimes in Lithuania too that we have below freezing temperatures, and people do hike or sometimes run, and long distances too, and it's all very, very mysterious, this atmosphere, snow, darkness, right?
Yes.
And of course, in Lithuania, we don't get that much darkness because it's not very northern latitudes. But still, when you go to places like Linköping or Finland, especially, right?
Yes.
The land of Mumin Troll, right?
Yes.
They have sometimes in winter days when the sun never rises, right?
Yes.
So, do you find their music, let's say Finnish music, or Sibelius, or other more contemporary composers' music, sometimes maybe they imitate this darkness in brooding sounds, like, right?
Yes, I really think there's a link there, and I just received a score from the Swedish composer Niels Lindberg, which is called Reflections from Dalarna, the province in northern Sweden, which is very much responsible for the folk music, a lot of the folk traditions of Sweden. And you can just hear it in the music. There's a melancholy, there's a darkness to it, there's a lyricism to it. And I can't help but think that the being that far north can have some effect on the musical expression and other artistic expressions. So I think that dichotomy between having months and months of darkness and then in the summertime having nonstop light, it's got to have some kind of effect on how people live their lives and the kinds of things that they create from an artistic point of view.
Just look how they celebrate Midsummer, right?
They go crazy.
They go crazy, exactly.
Yeah.
And sometimes they have this also musical expressions in their festivities also. And I'm wondering, did you find anything related to the national celebrations of, let's say, Finland or Norway or Sweden, even Iceland, right?
Yes. Yes.
Did you find anything related to that?
One thing I really try to do increasingly is this Nordic Journey, which was supposed to be just like one CD and then I would go on to something else. But then I got hooked, as I said. One thing I really have tried to do with these series of recordings is to work with many composers. And one thing I often suggest when we talk about a commission is to make the music or the particular composition really indicative, reflecting their country and their folk culture, and both from a thematic point of view with certain musical themes, but also harmonically from a formal point of view. So it's really something that can only come from, say, Finland or Iceland. I did a concert in Reykjavik at the Hallgrímskirkja last year, and the first piece on the program was a premiere of a piece that was written for that organ using one of the most important Icelandic folk themes, and specifically written actually for the horizontal trumpet on that particular organ. So it was very much a product of a time and a place. And that's what I'm continuing suggesting to the wonderful composers that I'm working with now. Try to make it reflective of Nordic culture as much as you can. You know, we've got enough preludes and fugues.
Right.
If you have to write a prelude and fugue, then try to use a theme from a particular country, and to try to make it more of a specific culture.
Right. Did you have a chance to visit Faroe Islands, for example?
Yes. Yes.
They do have a separate culture there, right?
Yes, and
especially
in fact,
organ.
I found that with every Nordic country I've been to, there are certain similarities, but there are tremendous differences between each one. If you contrast Finland to Sweden, entirely different in so many different ways. But yes, the Faroe Islands, I had really never even heard of until a few years ago. And I happened to buy a CD of wind music from the Faroe Islands, which was brilliant, all by new composers. And I thought, well, I've got to learn more about this. And so I went and played at the summer festival in 2015 and played some Faroese organ music. And it's fantastic.
Exactly.
And it's entirely different. It has this kind of introspective feeling to it, this quiet kind of feel, because if you look at a map where the Faroe Islands are located, it's in the middle of nowhere in the North Atlantic. So it's not near anything. So these folks have really developed their own folk culture, and being so separated for most of their experience, they've come up with their own thing, and it's wonderful. And there's some fabulous composers there now.
The only thing that Lithuanians, for example, know about Faroe Islands is that our national soccer team always compete with Faroe Islands team on qualifying, championship for the European Cup or the World Cup, and we almost never win. We are so bad at soccer that we compete with those our distant neighbors, let's say, and we don't know anything about that culture at all. So some things that you discovered there is so fantastic for people around the world, not only for Lithuania too.
Right, and that's the power of music in general, because music is an international language. We can all understand that to a certain extent. We can all speak that language. And so, for example, learning more about new music from the Faroese culture or hearing their indigenous folk music really gives you a window into their point of view, and you can kind of sense their isolation, the loneliness really of their culture. I mean, they were, until technology made transportation more amenable and possible, that these folks were left to themselves for centuries. And it's intriguing then to see how that affected their dancing, their music, the visual arts, and their whole really philosophy and perspective on life. And music gives us a window into their soul.
And regardless their peculiar location on the globe, right, isolated culture, right, they do have a very prominent international organ festival there.
They do. They do. And it's just amazing, these countries, and Iceland the same way, that if you look at the total number of people who live there, it's amazing at what they've accomplished. I mean, for example, even Sweden, I think, has something like 8 or 9 million people, in a vast country. That's the population of New York City. So just look at these societies. I think Denmark has between 5 and 6 million. Iceland, maybe 350,000, something. And they're creating such fabulous new music, and they've been doing so for quite a while, and in all the performing arts. And that's what continually makes me amazed at these societies that are really not at the forefront of what we would think of as notable. I mean, we hear about the United States, we hear about Russia, we hear about China. You don't see many news releases about the Faroe Islands in the New York Times.
But what happens today, James, is that that the culture is now no longer monolithic. Yes, you
Exactly.
don't hear in New York Times those distant places, but there is a group of people interested in it, right? And they may connect online in some appreciation culture group of those distant lands, And although it doesn't get mainstream media attention at all, or not enough, but thanks to people like you, for example, of course, this music and this culture gets recognized, right? May I say, for example, may I assert that James is one of the most passionate people who make Nordic music, Nordic culture, organ especially culture, known in the world today. Can I say this?
You can say that. It's my goal to celebrate the culture, to celebrate the music. But it's interesting enough. I'm not a Nordic person,
right.
Nor do I have any Nordic that I know of ancestry. Most of my family came from Scotland, England, and maybe a little bit France. And so that I know of, I have no ancestral connection, but yet somehow the expressions from these countries speak to me. And I think it's because a lot of this music sounds very introspective to me. And we were talking about darkness and cold weather, that it's kind of reflected in their means of expression, and somehow that speaks to me, and I can't in the end explain it.
Right. And James, those governments of Nordic countries that you are involved in should give you an honorary citizenship or a medal for being so generous and promoting their culture, right? I think it will happen in some times, because do you think that Nordic people recognize that somebody like you from America takes their culture and goes abroad and shouts from the roofs about the treasures that they have? Do they appreciate your efforts enough today?
Well, I think the composers do, and I think audiences like hearing the music. I was in Denmark recently and played a program called Nordic Journey, and it had featured every Nordic country that I could think of. And all of this music was not only new to the audience, but it was new to any of the organists who were there. And I just think people might appreciate, just because of the novelty of it and to open up new possibilities. There are many fine organists all throughout the Nordic lands who play Nordic music. I'm not the only one. I'd like to think that I've at least given the chance to composers to create something new, and try to celebrate unpublished works from previous eras or forgotten works that I think should be appreciated and played by others now. So one of my goals actually is, this project continues, is to start a Nordic Journey series as far as music publishing is concerned, to make a lot of these rare scores available to other organists so they can play for their audiences and to enjoy. But I'm not the only one doing this sort of thing. I mean, there's an incredible amount of really fantastic music making happening all through the Nordic world.
The more the better, James, right? The more
absolutely. This is not a competition. The more that people can share and contribute a verse to the poem, so to speak, is all to the good.
Because when people hear your passion about Nordic culture, some people, yes, they follow your path and get interested in this culture, right? But people think, wait a second, maybe I should get interested into Romanian culture, right? Or let's say Balkans, right? Balkans also have fantastic organ culture that it's just beginning to get traction in the world. It does, because from the efforts of certain organists and organ builders and organ experts, who promote. They have festivals and etc. But it's still relatively new to the general global organ music lovers, let's say.
Yeah, I think in general people don't understand why I'm doing this. I think particularly in my travels that I think that it's hard to explain why someone would devote so much time and the major part of one's life now to a culture that has no connection to my heritage, or music that has only recently become a part of my life. And I think people tend, and we've just talked about it, they like the familiar. They like stuff that they know. As you say, they want to go to McDonald's when they visit Paris. I mean, it's just a part of life now. So there are a lot of people who probably don't understand. There are probably a lot of people in the Nordic lands who don't quite understand why I'm doing this, but a lot of people do. And I think there's a lot of excitement now amongst many musicians for what they're discovering and what technology has allowed us to discover. And the technology such as what we're doing now enables us to share more.
And James, when you, for example, collaborate with those Nordic composers, do they have their own ideas what they can compose, or do you suggest something? It's
a little bit of both. At the beginning, I would just say, write me a composition. But now I try to be as specific as possible. And I think the composers appreciate that, to give them a sort of a guide to what I'm trying to accomplish and to how a new piece of music might fit onto a particular project. Right now, I'm just starting a project that will take me to Trondheim, Norway next year at the Nidaros Cathedral. And so I'm really promoting Norwegian music as a special part of that project, although there'll be music from other Nordic lands as well. But each project is now having its own identity, and so I'm trying to give as much information as I can of my desires to composers, and they seem to respond very well to that.
And James, when you mentioned earlier about the influence of folk music in those compositions, today and in earlier days, right in the beginning of the 20th century, let's say, I cannot help but notice or remember that so many legends and myths, mythical creatures, right, are walking the woods and mountains in those regions, right? Trolls and witches and other creatures that we don't even know the names, right?
Yes.
So my question is to you: do those present-day composers take sometimes the mythical elements of their culture? Do they create some musical compositions inspired by that?
I think somehow subconsciously they do. And I think this mythic quality still informs a lot of the Nordic world, which I find very fascinating. For example, in Iceland, if they are building a road and accidents happen or whatever with the actual construction, they'll think that the elves are unhappy. This is true. I'm not making this up. And they'll redirect the road around some particular place so as not to disturb the elves. This stuff still happens. I can't say that with composers they're actually thinking this way, but I think, for example, if I suggest a theme, for example, earlier this year I premiered a piece by Kjellmuk Karlsson, a wonderful Norwegian composer I've grown very close to. And I requested a piece from actually the Shetland Islands, north of England, that was very much a Viking settlement in the Middle Ages. And there's a wonderful medieval melody called the Hymn to St. Magnus, which is in parallel thirds. It's very unusual medieval theme. And so I asked that he write a kind of a visionary piece based upon this rather obscure medieval melody. And the result was this sprawling, very dramatic, almost 20-minute piece that I played at Kalmar Cathedral in Sweden last April. And I hope to record someday, that has this sort of mythic, kind of epic quality, almost like a Icelandic saga. It's just such an imposing structure to it. And the drama behind it just seems to have this larger-than-life quality. So while I can't say that elves and mythic spirits inform these composers, I think it's a part of their subconscious, and they're a part of the way they view the world, and it's a very mystical kind of thing that in the end I can't explain.
It's so fascinating, James. You mentioned Iceland. I just remember they have this mythical creature called the ogress called Grilla, Gryla. And this is so mythical and fascinating. It's a legend, pure legend, but it goes about on Christmas time in Iceland. This ogress descends from the mountains and from the caves that she lives in, and together with the black cat, she has a Yule cat, or katan, they call it, and together they hunt for children. And they eat children. The Grilla, this witch, eats bad children, especially children who don't get enough presents in the form of new clothing.
Yes.
Imagine that. At Christmas time, if you don't get enough clothes, you might get hunted by Grilla. So, and this cat, black cat, is not very wise in terms of choosing who is with new clothes or not. He just eats everyone, every kid. So in those days, in 18th century and 17th century, even 19th century, kids were instructed to carry a knife or a scissors, because or this Grilla would put them into the how do you call it? A big box or non-box, but a place where they could use the scissors to get out,
Yes.
So the reason I'm mentioning Grilla, legend about Grilla today, is that for this Christmas, I will be improvising a legend about Grilla on my organ in Vilnius University St. John's Church, 1 hour long musical poem based on this terrible, scary Christmas story. And sometimes, nativity stories are okay, but people get so used to that, right?
Yes.
And this is a different nativity story, right?
Exactly.
Very dark and Nordic too. So my question to you is, James, did you find any traces of Grilla in Iceland?
No, I kind of stayed to the ring road and in Reykjavik. But I did think about this, because if you look at the scenery and the topography, it's like being on the moon in Iceland. It's very volcanic and rocky and stark. And you can imagine that if you were living out in the middle of nowhere in the darkness of the wintertime, that you would see things. And I think that's how a lot of this mythology and folk customs start, because it's so easy with a little bit of imagination to come up with this stuff on your own. And they have such an incredible literary tradition. They've always been, centuries. Everyone writes books there still. And they're probably some of those literate people that you would find anywhere. Mm-hmm. So it doesn't surprise me they would have some legend like that. And in any culture, they produce the Icelandic sagas. And then afterward, of course, if you go there, you can't help but flash back and imagine these things.
And it's so fascinating that those myths and sagas inspire new music to create, right?
Yes.
Living 21st century composers from Iceland or from other Nordic regions might get inspired by those sagas, and you are the one who is performing. It's amazing.
Yes, well, that's why I'm interested in breaking out of like the standard forms that organists play. There's nothing wrong with sonatas and chorale preludes and whatnot, and I still play this sort of thing. But increasingly, I try to connect musicians with whom I'm working to get them to plug into the unique qualities of their particular part of the Nordic experience. And that's why legends such as the one that you mentioned, that's very important. Mm-hmm. By the way, I would encourage you to record that improvisation recital and maybe to write it down on paper.
I record every improvisation recital that I play, and if I'm lucky, if the technology works, I will put it on YouTube for others to listen to.
Yes, well, I've seen some. They're really fantastic, but I'm thinking you should get it down into on paper as a composition,
Yeah, people ask me to do this, but I kind of get sometimes hesitant to do this because it's easier to improvise 100 musical poems than to transcribe just one.
Yeah.
Because it's like a very, very long dictation, taking very, very tedious dictation.
Yes. I understand.
Half speed, Of course, YouTube today has this technology where you can play at slow speed to 50%, and the pitch level still stays the same. It doesn't it doesn't drop one octave lower, and it's amazing. So it's possible. It is possible to improvise something on the spot and then transcribe it later.
Right. Yeah.
So James, fantastic insights. I'm very curious if you have something to say about the music that you will play in Vilnius also. Can you share a few thoughts on that?
Yes. One of the pieces I'm playing is by a Finnish composer, Mari Viitala, and this is a triptych, 3-part piece, big piece, but almost 20 minutes, in which again, I suggested the theme. It's a wonderful Finnish folk song, and he constructs a very interesting contrapuntal tour de force. This is someone who used to teach Baroque rhetoric at the Sibelius Academy in Helsinki, and Baroque counterpoint. And so you can see his comfort and ease of expression with those difficult and complex contrapuntal structures. So this piece starts, as I said, it's in 3 movements. The first part is called canon, and that's pretty much what you get, a very increasingly complicated canon in 4 parts, 5 parts, 6 parts. And then the second second movement, is a series of variations upon this Finnish folk theme, in which there are trios, fugettas, arias, all means of forms that are used, finally culminating with a double fugue, and which is an incredible tour de force. And then in the final, at the end, he sums up the folk tune and a very compelling harmonization. That'll be kind of the biggest piece that I play on October 1st at your church. But there'll be other things, a short piece by Frederick Sixten, Toccata Festiva, to start the program. The piece I mentioned that I played in Denmark at the Frederiksborg Castle, I'll be playing the Variations Fugue on a Danish folk tune by Sven Ingvar Mikkelsen. So it'll be a lot of new music that wasn't even in existence in the last year or so. Some things from my Finnish CD that I just recorded in Turku over the summer. So a lot of new things that I'll be very excited to share.
I'm so delighted that you're doing this for the organ world, James, because right now the global organ culture, especially in the Western hemisphere, faces some kind of cultural identity crisis sometimes, in terms of lovers of organ music sometimes abandoning interests because maybe it's so related to church, right? Liturgics.
Yes.
And sometimes in Europe too, people don't go to church anymore as often. And if organ is associated with the church too much, it gets sometimes also downgraded. So what you're doing, James, is very valuable. In this case too, you are reviving organ culture in a different way, not necessarily making it secular, yes, but you are sort of giving a chance for people to experience another kind of organ side, right? So have you ever thought about this, that in the long run, in 10, 20, 30 years from now, maybe your efforts will lead to generally speaking, more interest into organ music globally?
I think about this type of thing all the time. You bring up a couple of very good points. Number one, the organ really is inextricably connected to the church. It's always the best instruments have been in churches, the beautiful acoustics, beautiful architectural treasures. But the downside of that, as you say, people don't attend church as much anymore. And the organ for a long time has been not so much in the mainstream of musical expression. It's more of a niche now, a specialist. Mm-hmm. Also, I think to the uninformed or the amateur that organ music is something kind of musty and antiquarian and not really related to interesting new ways of thinking. That the organ is kind of an antique thing. They might know that Bach was an organist, but it has no connection with something new. With other kinds of music, with rock music, people are interested in, well, who's put out the new CD?
Exactly.
I'd like to hear the new thing on the charts. And we need to, I think, adopt some of that attitude. And we had that at one time. People were interested in the latest Beethoven symphony or the newest Mozart opera. But somehow we've gotten caught into this academic kind of approach to classical music, so that what I'm in my very, very small way trying to do is to create the idea that organ music can be exciting, and it can be a product of our time just as much as commercial music can be, and that there's exciting things to be heard that has nothing to do with church and religion, it can. I have nothing against that, but that the organ, because of the incredible amount of expression and tonal possibilities, can be even more relevant, I think, to contemporary music making if we think outside the box and put the Vidor away just for a few years and try something new. There's so many great composers out there and great organists that we have all kinds of possibilities. So yes, it would be my goal once I'm done with this project, and hopefully I'll be able to do it for a long time, that maybe years down the road it'll blossom in ways that I can't even imagine right now. And that certainly would be the long-term goal. Anyone could go out and make a recording of Bach. There's nothing wrong with that, but it's been done a million times. And so what I think for the overall health of music is to try to think of something new. And this is just my approach and the project that I chose, and hopefully the music that's coming out of this can be an inspiration to the next generation for them to find their own voice.
So this living organ culture in the 21st century is so vital, right? When we go to Paris, let's say capital of the world in terms of organ, probably
yes.
Today, even today probably, right? I do kind of get a sad feeling that yes, we get so much to hear so much great music in their cathedral and
yes.
and basilica and other churches that we adore basically. But in earlier 20th century, when Dupré was alive, when Duruflé was alive, and Langlais was alive, right? They all created something. It was a little bit different situation than today. There are only a few people. Thierry Esquèche, probably one of the champions today, who
yes.
is still, of course, Naji Hakim is
yes.
another one who is still trying to write their own new things. Not only improvise. Improvisation is. Basically, you cannot live without an improvisation in Paris, but they're doing more than that. They are composers. So what you probably inspiring people around the world when they hear Nordic Journey, right, project, maybe composers will turn their eyes into organ more also, not only in Nordic parts but everywhere. Right.
That's the goal.
Maybe it will revive the general culture that we're talking about.
I mean, just think about the 1920s in Paris and how exciting that would be with all those composers you just mentioned. Plus, that was the age when Ernest Hemingway was in Paris and other writers. Just think about the fermentation, the interaction between all these writers and painters, Picasso and all these great composers. What a lively and fascinating time that was. And it would be so wonderful to kind of recreate that in some ways now. It's certainly possible. And so I think this we've just got to get away from the historicism, the academic approach to music, and to really try to make this a living tradition rather than a museum piece.
music that changes people, right?
Exactly.
Of course, the museum still can change people. It is art, nevertheless, and art is something that touches people and changes for the better, right? This experience.
Yes.
And sometimes iPhone is a piece of art too. iPhone 7 now released, right? If it does change the world, it might be called art, right? Steve Jobs was certainly an artist, right? And but we do have a great need for people like that in the organ world, right? The visionaries who lead us into the future. So what you're doing, James, is leading our culture into the unknown, right?
Well, thank you.
Thank you so much for doing this, and you have a tremendous creativity. And,
thank you.
I sometimes don't get caught into your inner drama. Sometimes you know this voice inside your which tells no, it's risky, it's too risky, people don't appreciate let's say Frederick Sixten's music in Vilnius, right? Or in the Netherlands. They never known, right? But you do take a leap of faith, so I salute you for that, and
thank you so much.
Another tremendous adventure ahead of you.
Thank you. It's been great talking with you, Vidas.
And before we end, people probably are curious how they can find more about you and your work, James. Can you give them a link?
Okay. Yes. I have 2 websites now, and you just think of my name, James D. Hicks. It's jamesdhicks.com. I'm on Facebook. I also have a second website. We don't really have time to talk about that, but this kind of combines my love of hiking and music and Nordic culture. It's called HicksNordicHike.com, in which in 2018 I'll be hiking the St. Olaf's Path in Sweden and Norway in memory of a friend of mine who died of cystic fibrosis, and I'm trying to raise money for cystic fibrosis research. So that's another way to hear about my activities. And my CDs are released by Pro Organo in the United States, and that's proorgano.com. All the CDs so far are there.
Fantastic. I will make sure to include all those links into the description of this podcast, so that people who will go to our website, for example, they can literally click on the
links. Yes.
Again, thank you so much. You are tremendous inspiration, and I'm so looking forward to meeting you physically, face to face in Vilnius.
It'll be wonderful. Thank you so much.
If you liked this conversation, I encourage you to visit my blog, Secrets of Organ Playing, at organduo.lt, where you will find lots of insights, practical advice, and training for every area of organ playing. You can subscribe to this blog for free to get your daily dose of inspiration and to be the first to know when any of my future podcasts roll out. I hope to help you reach your dreams in organ playing. I'm Vidas Pinkevičius. Thanks for listening, and I'll catch you online really soon.